Okay, yes, please. I like it for introductions.
Thank you. Our next speaker is returned Vietnam POW Larry Starr. Larry was captured February 1968 and released in 1973. And Larry has made 30 trips to Indochina, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam in search of live Americans that were left behind. And Larry's going to speak a little bit about his quest and over these 30 years that he's friendship with the Alliance. And here's Larry. Thank you.
You know what I thought I'd do? We have a lot of live sighting. We have a lot of live sighting reports, and I've been involved with all of them myself. So I thought I'd just run through some of them just as a kind of review. We've got a lot of information, awful lot of information about live guys, where they are, and even where they are. Yeah. So. I talked to a lot of people that have been involved, obviously. And one of the first people that I came across, even though I had been working on the issue for a while, with a live sighting report. He didn't see him himself, but I'll tell you quickly what it is, because I've got a lot of these and I want to just go through them. But his name is Dan Smith. He's unfortunately deceased now. But Dan, I met him here in Washington, and he said, you know, are you a Vietnam veteran? I said, well, no, not exactly. I'm a Vietnam civilian from, so we got to talking, and he said, you know, I ran into this guy. He worked for Continental Airlines, and he said that he was in a bar in Pattaya. Those guys could travel all over the place. So he was in a bar in Pattaya Beach, and this guy came up to him, and he said, I just got to tell somebody that you look like you might have been in Vietnam. And he said, I was. Not me, but him. And so he said, I got to tell you something. I talked to this guy, and he said, he get his name and everything, and he said, what did he say? He said that he and his buddies were out with their motorbikes on Sunday. He's Norwegian, and they were on an aid project to Vietnam. And so they worked at a place called Bai Bang Paper Mill, and they were helping the Vietnamese to, make the paper. I guess, cardboard and paper. So anyway, he said, hey, I saw some Americans. Now this is the guy on the motorbike. I saw some Americans today. And he said, what? He said, yeah, they were on a road game, and they were on the road. We were on a motorbike, so they stopped us. And then they took these guys and they hustled them off to the side. And they told us to turn around and go back. We didn't see anything. But he said, one American turned around and said, this may be our last shot, so hell with it. I don't care what they do. Tell the world about us. And that became a kind of a famous expression at that time. About 10, 15 years ago, something like that. And so that was one guy, Dan Smith, his story, too long to tell, but anyway, basically he got a hold of a Seattle station, TV station, and told the guy. And the guy said, well, I have to check it out before I put anything like this on the radio or on TV. So the guy's name was Stein Gooding. And so I guess there are a lot of Stein Goodings like Bob Smith or something. So anyway, he said, let's try to find him. So trying to find him was like very difficult. Anyway, we are gonna make one last call, and that was it. They called this guy, you signed Goody? Yeah. And he said, okay, were you over in Vietnam? He said, yes, I was working construction work in Vietnam. Okay. And what did you see? He said, I saw these Americans. And they were speaking English with an American accent. So, anyway, that's one story. Those guys were never heard of, as far as I know. Mike, you can correct me if you have other information. But not that there were about, they said half a dozen guys that were working on a road to route. They didn't even get any names or anything, and never heard of again, as far as I know. That was Dan Smith. Then there was another thing that I ran across over in Laos. A friend of mine who's going to be very helpful to us in the very near future. Yeah. She said, she's part of the royal family, and she said there's apparently one guy in the Lao government, which is communist, who is from the royal family, And so turns out that he also worked very close to the king and very close to the leader of the Lao military, and was kind of his bodyguard, as I understand it. And in the course of my work in Laos, I found that there were these guys who, then not very many of them, just a few of them, that had access to what we call a black box. And the black box had the names of every prisoner, everyone that was shot down, where they were captured, where they were taken, whether they were taken to Russia or whatever. Had all that, and that was in this black box. I believe he has, may still have access to that black box. So that's something we're working on right now. Anyway, so I've got to move along here because there's a lot of stuff to cover. Anyway, so then many of you know about this book, An American in the Basement. And right here in this hotel, I think it was this one or the Holiday Inn again. This gal came up to me, and because I'd heard about the book, they talked about the book in the meetings in the morning. And so I said, well, I got it, just trying to keep up with Vietnam. So I'm not interested in American in the Basement is about Scott Spiker. Scott Spiker was not in Vietnam, but he was in Iraq and shot down and apparently survived. A lot of information about him, but the government never could find him. I think when he started to look, it was too late. At any rate, this book, I find out, page 272, 276, something like that, has a lot of information about American POWs. I said, wait a minute. So let me tell you one story. POW. That's a guy who was taken prisoner, and he was being held. And a long time. I think he was prisoner maybe, I'm not sure of the date. But anyway, early on. And so they said, hey, I said, let me look at the book. So I look and I said, hey, there's a lot on POW. And here's the story of POW. He was taken prisoner. And Mike, was this the guy that was taken prisoner? Mike, was this the guy taken prisoner in China? I think it was. POW. Anyway. Pogriba, was he the one taken prisoner in China? I think he was.
He was captured by the Chinese
Chinese,
during
right.
Vietnam. They was
Okay.
right down by an aircraft Chinese.
Yeah, that's right. And then what they did is they moved him. Get that? They moved him. How do you move prisoners? The American government contacts the Chinese government and said, look, you don't want this guy, and we'll just transfer him over to Vietnam. He did. They kept him for 20 years. And then along the way, there's another very interesting thing. General Lacey got involved. He had already retired from the Air Force. Quite a guy. He's quite a few important jobs. And as he relates it to a committee of the U.S. government, as he relates the story, he says, hey, the president asked me to find out what's going on with the POWs, because he was getting reports about live POWs, but he didn't know who to believe. He probably couldn't believe anybody. But anyway, what he did is the office president, the White House contacted him, said, would you be able to come in? And so he said, yeah, he'd come in. And so when he went in there, he said, the president would like you to go and check out some of this information about live Americans. So he got a diplomatic passport. He got a lot of other things, I think, as well. And he went over to Vietnam, and there were 2 prisons that he was interested in and seeing. Because obviously he had some backup information. So he went to the first prison, and he went there with Le Duc Tho. Now, Le Duc Tho was one of the horses in Vietnam. He's one of the top guys. And so he went with him to the prison. And there was no one there. There were no Americans there. So he said, I want to go to this other prison. And he told Le Duc Tho that, I'd like you to come with me. He said, no, I can't. So he goes to this other prison, and I started out with Pogriba, come back to Pogriba. This is, he goes into the prison. He had known about Pogriba. He had met his wife. And so anyway, he says, he goes in and he sees this guy. And he said, the guy said, I'm Pogriba. He said, yeah, he said, we'll have to see about, getting you out. He was there with some other guys that had tried to come in with a helicopter, I guess, and pull them out of there. And they were shot down. And there were 5 of them, and 3 of them were in his prison with Pogriba. So there were 4 there. Anyway, so that's Pogriba. I'm going to just skip through these things. There's big stories behind each one of them. But the next one in the book that I want to talk about is Geist. Very important because he mentioned that General Lacey again met this guy in Oklahoma at the VA hospital, and they got to talking, and he said that he had gotten sick, and they moved him to the hospital. They didn't say whether or not he's still there, but they gave him a new name, and so he was in this hospital under a different name than his own. But he also was identified, and so he knew who he was. And he said, I'm part of a group of 61 that had come back from Vietnam. So you say, well, what happened? Well, the guys were told that they never told anybody their punishment would be to go back to Vietnam. That's a pretty hefty thing to deal with, so obviously I would expect some guys did contact their wives or whatever and kept it very quiet because we hadn't heard about any, at least I hadn't. So that's his story, guys, and I'm trying to build a case for there are not just a few, there are a lot of Americans that were captured. Now, of course, are they still alive? Getting pretty old, getting pretty old. So, one of my, but that's the story of Geis. There's other things about it, but that was the way he went to the president. The president came to him and said, would you go over there? You know, I'll get you all the coverage you need as far as passport and stuff like that. And so he did go. And one of the, now this is a committee, staff members of the committee, like the Foreign Relations Committee, and they were staff members, and they were interviewing Lacey. And he asked about these two cases. And so the one guy said, you talked to him? Yeah, I talked to him. How did you know it was him? He said, I know him, I have pictures of him. Anyway, so there's 61 guys. I don't know what happened to them or where they are or whether they're, how many are still alive.
Let me see Papa.
Let me skip over into Laos. Sansai, Xai. It's a place up in kind of remote place, very remote, in Laos. It's not very far from the Vietnam border. And the significance of Sansai is I made 5 trips there. Got to know the first time I went there. The guy said, where are you going to stay? I said, oh, any one of these hotels. There were none, you know. So they said, oh, we'll talk to the general. And so he was in charge of the military in that area during the war. And so I said, well, that's a fine and a half, you know. That's it. And I kept trying to work with him. And so finally, on the last, the 4th trip, I guess it was, I went to the guy who I was working with, the interpreter. He said, I've talked to the general. And he said that during the war, and he didn't know what the current status was, that there were about 4 to 5 prison camps, little ones, with 4 to 5 Americans in each one. And the same is true all across the border into Vietnam. So we're talking a minimum of 32 guys. You know, and here I am, Larry Stark, wandering around, you know, but our government, they could, if they wanted to, go in there and get these, and find out where these guys were, and then start working to get them home. But no, they don't do that. Most of you here probably know, the government is not very cooperative on this one. They don't care. One of my trips to another thing, but Sansai, that was a big upshot of there. And why was I in Sansai? Because, I don't know if you remember the picture, but there was a guy, a Westerner, probably an American, but I'm not sure, a Westerner, and he was standing there with a boy on one side, this tall, and we were told later that his grandfather, or not his father-in-law, was in that picture too. And later on, I was in, just much later, like 20 years later, or 15, I guess it was, I had made arrangements to meet this boy. and I was really looking forward to it. And instead of like today being late, I should have gone early. I should have been there for him. Because he came early, this kid. Now he's 22 years old. And I was working with the Lao policeman, believe that. And so the Lao policeman said, okay, you know, this guy wants to meet you. Can you come down? So I'm just trying to find where is this one thing going to go? You know, is he American? Was his father American? And then you know he'd be entitled to some benefits and stuff here. What happened to his dad? And so his dad was still alive, but by the time I finished up there, which was about 3 or 4 years later, still hadn't located the father. But he died, and they said he's buried in Sansai. So obviously I'm not bouncing around too much for you, but anyway, the significance of that is that again we got very close, very close. And the guy had left the day before because he had to go to the harvest. Harvest is big for those people. I mean, that's it. That's their whole year, you know. And you don't get rain or something in the wrong day, and your harvest is ruined. You're in trouble for the whole year. So I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. So I didn't get to meet the kid. But there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that indicates that was he an American?